Very specific nuclei that are likely responsible for REM sleep. We have the peribrachial area that's in the purple. This particular area is really important for initiating REM sleep, and it's also important for those REM related behaviors that we see that occur during REM sleep. And so, this particular series of nuclei have cholinergic receptors. They're located in the dorsal brainstem. These areas project to the medial pontine reticular formation. These are really, this particular area is really important for producing the atonia that we see in REM sleep. And so we really need that muscle paralysis, because if we don't have it, then we start to act out our dreams during REM. That can be really dangerous. So if you have somebody who has atrophy in this area, we might see, for example, that they have REM behavior sleep disorder. If you there's a series of studies on cats that they've actually lesioned part of this area and found that they act out their dreams. And again, it can be really dangerous for a person because they tend to have aggressive dreams. They can hurt their partner. They can fall out of bed, all sorts of things. Now, the nuclei in this particular area, which are located in the pons, they are responsible for participating in REM sleep. They also project to several areas in the brain that help produce those REM-related sleep behaviors. So they are important for projection throughout the brain. Now, just very briefly, we're going to cover some of those, some well-known and some lesser-known sleep disorders. So the disorders of non-REM sleep, we tend to see being something like sleep talking, sleepwalking. They occur during non-REM sleep because during REM, your body's paralyzed, and so we see people acting out and doing things during that time. And they say, for example, if you have a sleepwalker, that you really shouldn't wake them. But that's mostly for your safety, because if a person is sleepwalking, you don't want, they're in deep sleep, and so the last thing that they remembered is being in their bed. And so if you disrupt somebody in deep sleep, they might actually lash out and hurt you. And so it's actually for your safety more so than theirs. And so if you have somebody who's sleepwalking, you really want to just kind of very gently guide them back to their bed or to the couch or a safe place for them to go back to sleep. So insomnia is a condition where you can have difficulty falling asleep, difficulty staying asleep, combination of the two. We see that sometimes this is a disorder of slow wave sleep, and so people have an inability to fall asleep, and they really do struggle with this. But remember that insomnia is not necessarily something that, it's not that you don't give yourself time to sleep. It's you do give yourself time to sleep, but you just can't do it. So some people say, oh, I have insomnia. And if you ask them, well, how much time did you lie down and go to sleep? Oh, I only gave myself 3 hours. That's not insomnia. It's one of the few conditions that you can go to a doctor. There's no real absolute test. There's no blood test. There's definitely sleep tests that you can do, like the multiple sleep latency test. But you can actually go to a doctor and get sleep medication without having to necessarily prove that you have insomnia. But there are multiple causes. Sometimes anxiety and depression can cause insomnia, and if you treat that, you can help the insomnia. There's also something called drug dependency insomnia, and if a person's using sleeping pills continuously, they can develop a tolerance of that, and so they end up getting deprived of REM or non-REM sleep, and so they continue to increase their dose, and it continues to not help over time, and so they can become very dependent on that medication. Narcolepsy is a very specific disorder. A lot of people think it's just that you keep falling asleep and you're just lazy. It's not. It's a very specific slow wave sleep disorder where a person has these uncontrollable urges where they cannot stay awake. And they will essentially drop because they go through these sleep spells. There are some causes that suggest that it's mutations in the genes, so it could be hereditary. There's also specific conditions where it might be a mutation in the gene that causes the orexin or orexinergic neurons to die off and stop producing orexin and stop reacting to it. And so in those cases, which actually can be caused by genetic issues, it can also be caused by a virus that can damage these particular cells. And so orexin helps keep you awake. And if you lose the orexin, then you are essentially losing the ability to keep awake. In this particular condition, you basically get medicated with stimulants to keep you awake during the day, and sleep medication help you sleep at night, because many people with narcolepsy have a lot of trouble sleeping at night, which seems counterintuitive to the fact that they're falling asleep constantly. But they just never feel quite rested because they're just engaging in that sleep just too often throughout the day. There's a really interesting YouTube video here. It's not necessarily a documentary, but it is about a particular case. I think you'd see just how severe it is and how life-altering it is. You can't drive, you can't go out, you can't do things because you're afraid you're going to hurt yourself or fall asleep. Or, it could be triggered by high emotion that it can actually cause that. There's another condition that you can have with narcolepsy called cataplexy. We're going to cover that in just a second. But you can have cataplexy without narcolepsy and narcolepsy without cataplexy. It's just kind of they tend to go hand in hand. Sleep apnea is another condition that a person actually stops breathing during sleep. You can have obstructive sleep apnea, which you have a full blockage, and you might be due to inflammation. It could be due to your soft palate, having a specific anatomy that allows for a blockage to occur. Some people over this series of night might have hundreds of periods of episodes where they stop breathing and they kind of choke awake. A lot of people who have sleep apnea snore, but not everybody who has sleep apnea snores, and not everybody who snores has sleep apnea. It just tends to go hand in hand. It also has some risk factors like obesity and things like that. But it's a really difficult condition because what ends up happening is that you stop breathing, it pulls you out of your deeper sleep. You tend to be very tired. You can have major headaches when you wake up because the increased cranial pressure. And so it can cause you to have really intense fatigue throughout the day. And so you definitely want to make sure that you get that treated. And a good way to get that treated is, one, you could try to reduce your risk factor and lose weight. So sometimes people who are obese can actually change and cure their sleep apnea by losing weight. That's not the case for everybody, but the treatment that you take while you have sleep apnea is CPAP, or continuous positive airway pressure. And what that is it forces the airways open. So if you have a partial blockage or a full blockage, what's happening is that you're forcing those airways open, and you are allowing the person to breathe through the night. And it really, really helps with things like the fatigue and the issues that you might experience just, with the apnea itself. So another really interesting condition that a lot of people are actually experience and don't even realize that it's called something is called sleep paralysis. And this can be very scary. It's usually not indicative of any kind of major problem, but what tends to happen is you are usually waking up from sleep and you are not able to move, and you might experience a hallucination. It's very terrifying. So it might only last a few seconds to just a couple minutes, but you can't do anything. And so you're in this sort of state where you're really scared and you feel like someone might be trying to kill you or hurt you, and you can't do anything from it. You're sort of, you're stuck. And so a lot of people struggle with this, and they think something's wrong with them, so they don't really talk about it. But there was one study that suggested as many as 30% of college students experience sleep paralysis. And so just like any sleep disorder or sleep issue, there are three major triggers or exacerbators of the sleep conditions. And it's caffeine, stress, and sleep deprivation. So especially consuming caffeine later in the night, that can definitely make a sleep condition worse. When your stress is high and when you're deprived of sleep, can all independently or together make a sleep condition worse. So the way that what happens in sleep paralysis, your brain and your body are kind of on two different wavelengths. So your brain on one part thinks that you're in REM and is paralyzing your body, but your kind of level of consciousness is starting to wake up. So you're starting to be aware of your surroundings. And if you really think about it, a dream is really a hallucination that you experience during dreaming. And so this hallucination that you're experiencing, you're kind of dreaming out loud almost. So the process of REM sleep, where your body is paralyzed, the inhibition of the motor neurons is taking place, and you're potentially experiencing hypnagogic hallucination. And so this, if you are falling asleep, you can actually experience a hypnagogic hallucination. But if you experience sleep paralysis where you're experiencing a hallucination as you wake up, which a lot of people tend to experience sleep paralysis as they're waking, then that's a hypnopompic hallucination. Now, cataplexy is a condition that, like I said, you can experience this with or without narcolepsy. I like to compare this to the idea of a fainting goat. It's not the same thing. Fainting goats do not have cataplexy, but it looks very similar. So cataplexy is where all the muscle activity or tone just becomes lost instantaneously. So it's almost like the person's in REM, but they're still awake and they stay conscious. And so this can be linked to really strong emotional stimulation, for example, laughing or being scared. So think about videos that you see of fainting goats where somebody makes a loud noise and the goat kind of just goes paralyzed and falls over. It's the same kind of issue with cataplexy. If a person tells a really funny joke, the person with cataplexy can actually seize up and kind of fall over. Now, they stay conscious unless they have narcolepsy, which then that would trigger sometimes a sleep attack. And so the person can sort of seize up and then fall over and fall asleep. But again, you don't necessarily have to have the conditions together. Now, hypnagogic hallucination, this is that sort of dreamlike state that we see at the beginning of sleep, where it's like a dream, but you feel almost conscious and you're awake. But that's something that is specific to this particular condition of cataplexy. But some people do experience sleep paralysis with this and hypnagogic hallucinations if they are experiencing the sleep paralysis as they fall asleep. A lot of times people report it, though, that they are experiencing it as they wake up. Now, the final thing that I want to cover is just a few tips for you to help improve your sleep, because it's one thing that we have to consider is that we need to make sure that we have proper sleep hygiene. And sleep hygiene, very similar to like your health hygiene, this is ways for you to be healthy, ways for you to maximize the ability for you to get a good night's sleep. And so a lot of this falls on the idea that we need to condition our brain to want to sleep when it's time to sleep. So, and that'll kind of come into play here in a minute. So one thing you want to do is make sure that you don't do anything really rigorous, no really like intense exercise right before bed. That can kind of stimulate you and that can make you want to stay awake. Try not to smoke. If you are a smoker, you definitely don't want to smoke right before bedtime. And if you feel like you have to wake up to smoke, if you have to get up in the middle of the night to smoke, you probably really need to reconsider your habit, because it might be bad enough that you really need to reduce the amount that you smoke. Don't drink any alcohol prior to bedtime. A lot of people use alcohol as a nightcap and a way to fall asleep. But the problem is that alcohol gets metabolized really quickly. And so when you, it may actually help you fall asleep because it works as a depressant. But what happens is you metabolize that really quickly, and then you wake up in the middle of the night, and now you can't go back to sleep. And so you really struggle with falling asleep at that point. And so using alcohol as a sleep aid is actually not good, even though a lot of people, say, oh, it helps me fall asleep. It may help you fall asleep, but it's not going to help you stay asleep. You want to refrain from any eating or drinking, eating heavy meals, drinking, consuming a lot of caffeine a few hours before bed. Caffeine has a half-life of about 6 hours. And so it takes about 6 hours for half of the caffeine to leave your body. And so if you consider, you have consumed caffeine right before bed, you're going to have a lot of that caffeine still in your body when it's time to go to sleep. So you want to avoid caffeine. Can also make, because, caffeine works on your adenosine receptors and it works to keep you awake because adenosine wants to keep you asleep. When you are, trying to, if you have a sleep condition, you definitely want to avoid caffeine closer to bedtime because it is going to keep you up and it's probably going to exacerbate your condition. To help condition the brain into wanting to fall asleep, you should definitely use your bed only for sleep and sex. You want to make sure that your bedroom is comfortable. So, anywhere between 65 to 68 degrees, nice cool room, dark room, but not super, super dark, nice comfortable bed. If you feel that you aren't able to fall asleep, you shouldn't just immediately stay in the bed. You should give it about 20 minutes and then get up. So you shouldn't stay in the bed and toss and turn, because if you do that, then what's going to happen is you're just going to toss and turn and teach your brain that it's going to not be able to fall asleep. So you only go back to bed after 20 minutes when you feel really drowsy, and you try to take that opportunity to do things like read a book, do something really mundane. Don't use your computer. Don't use any electronics, because that's going to confuse your brain. You also want to make sure that you have a good circadian rhythm. So early in the morning, as you wake up, try to get sunlight, for at least 30 minutes, within 30 minutes of waking, to set your circadian rhythm. Avoid electronics and bright light at night. Again, you don't want your brain to think that it's daylight. Another important thing is to avoid excessive napping, which means that a 90-minute cycle is how long it takes for you to go. 90 minutes is how long it takes for you to go through one sleep cycle. And so if you if you nap during the day for 3 hours or for 2 hours, you are moving into multiple cycles, and you're going to start making it more difficult for you to fall asleep at night. So there's a couple of suggested, amounts of sleep. 20 minutes is really good to shoot for, 20, 30 minutes, but definitely no more than 90 minutes, because that's going to start infringing upon your sleep and being able to fall asleep at night. Anything that you can help yourself to condition your brain, having a pre-sleep routine, something that's calming, that separates the day, that can really help. So if you have a routine, maybe take a bath, maybe you take a shower, you clean your teeth and you read. There's, the series of things that you do can help condition your brain to make it feel even sleepier, so that way you're ready to go to bed. And obviously keeping a really consistent schedule where you're going to bed and you're waking up at the same times each night and morning really help, because you want to, again, condition your brain to want to go to sleep at certain times and want to wake at other times. If you wake up in the morning at the same time every day without an alarm clock, that's a really good sign that you have a good circadian rhythm. And you want to make sure that you do that even on weekends and even on days that you don't have to get up really early. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. If not, have